From Atlanta, Georgia, welcome to Fearfully and Wonderfully Me, a podcast for women on leadership and life skills with Rhea Story. Rhea shares powerful life and leadership principles, helping you maximize your potential and become the woman God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast episode. I am super excited for today's podcast episode because I have a very special guest that I am super excited to dig into our conversation. My guest today is Deanna Lynn, and I met Deanna just a few weeks ago. We were at a conference, and I really just connected with her, but then we touched base a few weeks or a week or so after the conference, and I really learned more about her and her passion for the work and the ministry that she's in, and more about the work that she's doing. And I was just super excited to connect with her and learn more because she definitely has a message that I think resonates with so many of us. And so we're going to get into all of that. But just briefly, a little bit about Deanna. After 10 years of working in the commercial sex industry, Deanna sought healing from a local residential program for exploited and trafficked women. Since graduating from the Refuge for Women in 2012, she's earned a master's degree from Asbury Theological Seminary and authored 2 books detailing each piece of her journey. And we're going to get into her books in just a few minutes. Deanna Lynn is now the Kentucky's executive director at the Refuge for Women, a national nonprofit that seeks to empower sexually exploited women to live a life of freedom through faith-based residential healing programs. Their vision is for every woman who is sexually exploited to have the hope, support, and tools needed to pursue her dreams and live a life of freedom. In addition to her role at Refuge for Women, she is a global consultant and speaker on anti-trafficking and anti-exploitation, a leader in Bible study fellowship, and weekend staff in her church's nursery, specifically the 2- and 3-year-old class. Deanna loves learning and will likely be a student for life. In her daily life, she and her husband, Matt, spoil their twin girls and their dog Buddy, who looks like a real-life giant Muppet. And Deanna, I have to say, I love that because when I saw that picture of your family and the real-life looking Muppet, I was like, oh, wow, that is such a great description. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to just even continue conversations with you, whether they're on air or off the air.
Oh, absolutely. I just really, I just finished one of your books. I just finished your book, Purchased, and I'm not quite finished with your second book, Integrated. So tell us just a little bit about the work that you're doing now and a little bit about your books and just share a little bit about that, because I know I was inspired in hearing your story.
Yes. So I have the privilege of being the executive director for Refuge for Women Kentucky. And, in 2011, when I was seeking help, I came out in December of 2011. There just really wasn't anything that I was aware of that could help me to heal from this very specific trauma that I had experienced. I had done all the things, I went to school and I got a job and I left a toxic relationship and I was out of the industry. But I really just didn't know how to relate to humanity anymore. And so, where do you go to heal from that? Because I've got sobriety. I'm getting that through my recovery meetings. I'm going to like a once a week sex workers recovery group, but that was just bringing up so much stuff that like I ended up triggering so bad and relapsing and those kind of behaviors. And I was just like, okay, I don't know how to interact with men, women, religious leaders, politicians. Like everywhere I go, I felt like people already knew that I was like this person. And I didn't know how I was ever going to get past being that person for 10 years without some real healing of why I ended up becoming that person in the first place, or why that option even looked at all like it was an option for me. And so since then, I went through the program. I kind of just relearned how to live into the beliefs that I already had. I already had these ideals and belief systems, but I didn't really have the discipleship that I needed to be able to live them out. And I didn't know how to make my beliefs and my trauma work together to become my whole person. So I just been used to splitting so often. And so since going to the Refuge for Women, I wanted to discover like who I was that had nothing to do with the sex industry. But I still stayed involved, with like just really grateful to be free and want to help others get free. But I did have the pleasure of writing a book, which took the first one took about 7 years. The second one took about 7 months. You may be able to tell that. I don't know. But I mean, I just had to go through so many layers of editing. Like, is this incriminating to the other people in the story? Is this,
Mm-hmm.
trying to keep people focused on this was how I interpreted my experience, and the memories that I had. But I really wanted that first book to go out so that not only, women like me who came into a residential program and asked questions like, do we ever get out? I wanted the mentors who walk alongside ladies to know, like, when somebody comes to a place like Refuge for Women, this might have been what her life looked like. And this is why it's not just a simple, like, I'm going to wake up and I'm free. Like,
Mm.
that has been possible for some people. I just had a little bit more work to do. And so that kind of details, when somebody says, like, this is a victim of human trafficking and this is somebody who's there by choice, like, people still purchase my pornography because they're like, well, this is ethical. She was there by choice. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
well, let me tell you about what I looked like as an 18-year-old girl when I made the choice to sell myself as my best option. And so kind of cut some of that dichotomy, but also, I really don't like to be like identified as either. I don't like to be dismissed, but I also don't like to be identified as a victim. I
Mm-hmm.
see where I was coerced, manipulated, vulnerable, all the things. Um, but I also, I take ownership, like that was the best that I could do with what I had. Somebody else may have made different decisions, but so I'm hoping that that book will allow people to kind of come alongside women with more compassion and
Mm-hmm.
not just like, well, why doesn't she just leave?
I love what you said there about how do I get my beliefs and trauma to sort of work together, because I think that's something a lot of us struggle with, whether we have a history of exploitation or deeply rooted quote unquote trauma. I think going through adversity is universal to humans. And I think a lot of us have difficulty with I want to do better, but because of past trauma or adversity or challenges that I have, or just me today don't always make the best choices for myself, I know that there are things that I do that don't serve me. But how do I close the gap between who I am and who I want to be? Just touch on that if you don't mind, because I think that that is just so key in our healing as people.
Yes, that is actually my whole second book. Uh,
Okay.
and the second book is the one that I really wanted to write, but I felt like the first one, kind of gave it credibility of where I was coming from.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, it's so easy for people to say, just like, get out. And it's like, okay, now that I'm out, what do I do? How do I live?
Mhm.
Because I've been trained one way and like literally brainwashed in a certain way of living for so long. So with my second book, Integrated, it was like, I had to learn, what I needed to learn as a 28-year-old who kind of stopped maturing in certain areas, and then what I just needed to learn as that's part of a shared human experience. A lot of
Mhm.
maturing is awkward and messy, and you can't really create those neural pathways until you actually go through it. And so, when it comes to having healthy relationships, when it comes to dating in a healthy way, the only way you're going to learn how to do that is by actually doing it. Otherwise, you're going to keep going back to what's familiar. And so, I remember one scene specifically in that book when I got married, I started like, all these different sides of me started coming out in front of my husband when we moved in together. And I'm like, I don't understand why this is happening. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't had a healthy live-in relationship, you know?
Mm.
So,
Mhm.
I graduate the refuge. I'm around women for 3 years. Then I go to school and I'm like, okay, am I like now I'm around guys and I'm like kind of starting to get paranoid again. And so learning how to have like a healthy relationship with all people who bear God's image, whether they believe
Mm.
that or not, that to me, they're all image bearers. And so I can't just like exclude one whole group of people because everybody's gifted differently. So I had to learn how to interact in healthy ways with friendships and dating and work and food and all these things that had just gone so awry before because I
Mm.
used them for relief Well, now it's like, okay, I can't use them in that way anymore, but it doesn't mean I don't have a relationship with them at all. It doesn't mean
Mm.
I don't work and I don't have relationships. I just have to have a healthy relationship with each of those things. And so, like I said, I think the only way to do that is to actually do that. And it feels uncomfortable because it's unknown and you've only known one way of living for so many years. And, but once you make the connection, once I made the connection, it was like, this is what it's like to feel safe. This
Mm.
is what healthy feels like. This is what non-drama feels like. Like drama alone can be intoxicating. So, learning how to feel comfortable when things are just still, you know.
I think you're exactly right, and it's unfortunate, but I think a lot of people do just drama itself can be addicting in a way, and so sometimes we don't realize, but we're creating some of that in our own circumstances by
Yeah.
the choices that we make, and realizing that we don't have to invite more drama into our life. Life is hard enough. We don't have to make
Yes.
choices that compound it. But it's that self-awareness, right? That was your second book, Integrated, right? And I don't have the full title is
Living
Integrated.
beyond. Yes. Living beyond this.
And that's the one that I'm not quite maybe halfway through. So your first book was Purchased,
Mhm.
and the second one is Integrated. So you really walk the readers through, what your journey looked like, but then specifically in this second book is how do we make that transition? Because I think that's the
Right.
question, right? Is what does the healing journey look like in all of these different dimensions and areas of life?
Yeah.
My
There was,
journey was, oh, go ahead.
oh, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
No, what, finish your thought.
Well, as it was just so important to me because there's so many people who wrote a book about like this is what the industry looked like and I wanted to have that so that people could have a different experience with that. But for me it was like, okay, so now you run this like awesome organization. What happened in between? How did
Hmm.
we go from healed to being this like amazing leader? And what if you don't want to be an amazing leader? Like, what if you just want
Mm.
like some sort of simple, normal life? What does it look like to do the normal things? And there was just like no material out there. And so I was like, I'll just share everything that I went through so that people can feel a little more normalized about like how awkward that process is. Because I think what's really detrimental with people that have a similar past to me is like we think things like, oh, that must be our trauma, or I must be broken, or, I've got to go through a healing place like all over again. And it's like, no, maybe we just need to restabilize and try again. We don't have to start all the way back at square one. We just learn.
Mm.
And like we learned at the conference, like we just fail forward, right?
Absolutely. It's just like when we learn to walk as people, right? We get up
Yeah.
and we step and we fall and we
Yeah.
get up and we fall again, but we don't call it failing to learn to
Right.
walk.
Yes. It's a
And if
it's a
we,
win in progress.
yes, yes. And if we can apply that same concept of just keep trying, just get up and figure out what that didn't work.
Right.
Let me try something different. Ah, I love that. Um, my journey was a little bit different from yours, but I hear a lot of the same similarities in that, and when I growing up for me, very isolated and, in a trafficking and abusive situation, and then, not going to church, not going to school, and, getting out into society, and then getting my first job as a server waiting tables in a pizza restaurant, and realizing I didn't know how to really talk to people. Like I didn't know how to connect to people. And that's just one of those things. It's like if you haven't been in that situation, you take it for granted that those social skills and just ability to interact with people um isn't something that everyone necessarily has access to when they have a different path, a different experience. And so I'm hearing you say that and thinking, some of those lessons that you share in your book would have been helpful for me early in my journey, for sure.
Hmm.
But it's interesting, as we come to these realizations, I think what I love is that you're turning around and you're sharing your story and your journey to help other people, right? And that's for me, the purpose and, having overcome something to begin with is being able to look back and help somebody else climb that mountain.
Yes.
So talk about what you do there at Refuge for Women,
Yeah.
because I know you talked about just very, very briefly that you're fairly new in that executive director role a little bit.
Yes, I was actually quite comfortable with my life before the position came across my path. So I had been working for 5 years in a ministry that was helping people to become better readers of the Bible all over the world, working in the nursery, BSF, all those things. Everything was very light focused,
Hmm.
and I was able to work from home. And my girls are 3 years old right now, so I was like, no major decisions until they're in kindergarten. Um, but when I saw that a change in leadership was happening, I didn't want my, like, the place that I called home, I didn't want that to
Mm,
go to just anybody, right? And I was also I'm really sorry to say this. I know everybody means so well, but I'm tired of being a consultant. Like, please stop using me for my thoughts. Like,
mm,
put me in a position where I can make some change. Like for so long we get asked to, like, we get paid to help with curriculum, and we get paid to consult or be on boards. And it's like, what if you just train me to do what you do? And then I can make decisions from an informed place, and develop my whole person, and not just the part of my story that's useful for grants and stuff like that. And so when I saw this position, I'm like, I have a chance to actually influence the landscape of what anti-trafficking, and I'm not just anti-trafficking, I'm pro-human flourishing. And
mm.
like, I don't want to just like talk about what we're against, but like, if we have a life that's truly flourishing, these situations will never look like a temptation or a trap again. Like we'll just see right through that stuff, right? And so I got to come in at a time where we were building a 24-unit apartment complex for
Wow.
women who are coming out of exploitation and trafficking, to have the time to explore who they want to become outside of this one chapter of their story. Now, if they want to go back into that work, great. Like, if you want to start a shelter, great. I just want to make sure people know that their testimony is not their only purpose, right? Like, there was a calling over our life long before, like, we were hijacked by it. Now, I do believe that I was entrusted a certain amount of suffering. I felt like God knew, I mean, obviously he knew that I would steward it in a way that hopefully would bless the kingdom, right? So I do feel like there's a certain amount of suffering he entrusted me with, although that he didn't purpose it for me, if that makes sense. And so to get to be able to walk alongside people and say, who do you want to become? Because after you leave a residential healing facility and you go into like some low income housing, or you start your next steps, like, you're back in survival mode. It's all about,
Mm,
how am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay bills? And I'm like, that's not flourishing either, right?
mm.
Like, what if we could gain a whole bunch of skills and then pick what we wanted to do? Instead of like, I'm just going to get a job to say that I don't work in sex work anymore, right?
Yeah.
And the goal is not to just get out, but to make sure that this never again will trap me, right? And the only way to do that is to build a life that makes that never look like a good idea. And it may seem obvious to other people, but to us, it's like, well, when you have like when you feel like your worth is a certain thing, or your beliefs are kind of shot, or you have these beliefs but you don't know how to live them, you kind of fall prey to some of these lies. We don't want that to happen anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And I think as I love what you're saying from two different perspectives, both for those who are learning to rebuild their life after trauma or exploitation, but also just this is something as parents want for their children, right? Is how to help them become the person that they want to be so that the wrong choices don't look
Yes.
tempting, right? How do we help them grow into the person that they have potential to become so that the right choices are easier from the beginning?
Yeah.
Um, because
Like,
there's so much out there that are that children can fall into and not realize the consequences of those choices.
yeah. I was gonna say, look at you, right? Like, I loved every single one of your sessions. Like, I can't, like, I hope we get to bring you to our events out here in
Well,
Kentucky,
thank
because what
you.
I want people to see is not, like we thought about like your book, like Bridges Out of the Past, and I'm like, no, I really think I want our theme to be change, right? Leading change in ourselves, leading change in others, because like you speak with such authority and confidence, and you just happen to mention some of what you went through, but like it's like such a small piece compared to the whole of who you are and how you present yourself. And I just want, like, I want every woman to feel that freedom, that, like they're not trapped by their addictions and their trauma and all that stuff. Like they are a whole person. That definitely helps us, like, in how we see the world. It gives us a
Mm,
unique perspective. But there's so much more, and I love the way you present yourself and your leadership, and the way you run with your gifts, but you also happen to have experienced these things.
Well, thank you. I think that's for me, and you probably have a lot of wisdom and insight on this too. Um, Having that sense of self-worth is the foundation for self-care and self-discipline and self-development, right? And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how did you help rebuild your sense of self-worth and self-confidence, and deal with some of those issues of I am worth taking care of and developing. And I mean, you went to college, and I mean, obviously a not non-traditional college experience, because you were, going back to school and being a little bit older. And you talk about some of that in your book of being a little bit older than the traditional college
Still
student.
acted, still acted like I was in my 20s. Well, I guess I was.
And
I was 30, I think. Yeah.
how did you rebuild some of that sense of confidence to tackle these new situations and all these new experiences?
Wow. So when you said that, I actually realized, like, I made a connection for the first time. I still struggle sometimes in showing myself compassion,
Mm,
and like I feel like I can love others so well, and sometimes I disconnect from loving myself, and I just realized all of these steps that I took were actually forms of loving myself,
mm.
you know? So I'm gonna have to sit with that and really make sure that that seed goes super deep. Um, but as far as like how I gained confidence, it was just my counselor always says, "You're a good learner. You are such a good learner. I love to learn." And so that's what I do. Like, and that's what our faith is, right? Like we're disciples. Just I'm just here to learn and integrate what he's taught me. But I think the only way to gain confidence is to learn new skills and then use those skills. And so that's why I'm intrigued about, like, with speaking, I feel like I kind of cap myself. Like I have this idea of who I want to be, but I'm afraid to live into that for some reason. It's
Mhm.
so vulnerable. And there's this part of me that thinks it's in there, but like, what if I'm wrong? So it's like maybe I'll just stick with writing and just read what I write, and I'll deliver the message. And then God gets all the glory, and it's not my gift and it's not my skill. And I just happen to deliver this word that he gave me, right? But it's just like learning a new skill, I guess.
That's awesome. I'm a big fan of just being intentional with growth and learning, right? Because you don't know where that can take you, but you know it's going to take you somewhere good, because growth always helps us in so
Yeah.
many different situations.
Yeah.
And you talked about being a lifelong learner, and continuing your growth journey. What does that look like for you? What was the next season look like?
Well, so I do plan to go in for my doctorate. I've always kind of known that I wanted to be a doctor. I have a lot of really big plans. I want to be a teacher. Um,
Oh.
not like, I mean, I'd love to be like a doctor, but I would love to just like research one area, which is funny because, people see when you have a master's degree, they think you know all the answers about the Bible. And I'm like, I actually only studied like one specific area.
Oh,
And
wow.
your doctorate narrows it down even more. So it's like you're only an expert on, like, I mean, people may not even be interested in it, right? But I'm going to study it really, really well. So that's what I would like to do is go into my doctorate work. And Asbury actually happens to have a great doctor of ministry program where you're able to work full time, have a family, but still do your residency and do your dissertation along the way. So that way you're not like
Mm.
grueling work for 3 years and then all of a sudden you have this dissertation due. It's like you kind of gradually do your research along the way. And they just happened to open up a cohort for women preaching and leading.
Wow. That's
Which is an
perfect.
area that I've kind of been stifled in, depending on like which what circles and what traditions they are in. And so having gone to a school and marrying somebody who sees mutuality a little bit differently or sees it as mutual, um, it's been like a whole new area for me. And so I would love to be in this cohort, but it starts in August, and I'm like, maybe I should at least like work here for 1 year before adding a whole other degree program. So I asked my husband to pray about it. He's like, the only thing I'm getting right now is the word protection. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. So maybe I will have to wait till the girls are in kindergarten to start that one.
Well, you definitely have a full plate. It's amazing. It's incredible. So I love just to hear your passion and your enthusiasm, right? Because uh, you just seem to be thriving. And that's what I love. That's what I wish I could give everyone listening to this podcast is that thriving in life is possible regardless of our journey.
Yes. There are two moments in my life where I feel like I stepped into who I always was, but just didn't have the peace. And so when I became a mom, it was like I had always been a mom. I just happened to have been given my children at that time. And so it was like I
Mm,
naturally stepped into this person, which was shocking because I knew nothing about nurturing, right?
mm.
Definitely wasn't experienced. And all of a sudden, like, I mean, I kiss them. They're 4 years old. They both sit in my lap, like morning, nap time, nighttime. Like I rush home if I'm away somewhere and I'm like, I can't miss bedtime. Um, and I'm so nurturing and loving and which was a fun side of myself to see because I didn't know if I was going to get along with children. And now I work in a nursery. But and then the other one was getting this job. Everybody's like, how are you doing at this job? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like I feel like I finally stepped into who I've always been. I just didn't have the right outlet.
Mm.
Like all of my gifts and my wiring and my passion gets to be channeled in this one thing that I love so much. So I
I
encourage
love
everyone to find.
that. Yes, because so much of the time we are in a job that it's a job and it might pay the bills, but you're not necessarily excited to get up and go to it on Monday. And it's possible to find that thing that makes you come alive that is in alignment with your gifts and where you're purposed. And that is a wonderful thing when you can find that 100%. Deanna, thank you so much for just sharing a little bit about your wisdom and insight and some of your lessons learned along the path of your journey. Tell everyone listening where they can learn more about Refuge for Women and all of those good things if they need to connect with you, socials, websites, all that sort of thing.
Yes, so you can go to refugeforwomen.org, and if you're specifically looking for next steps and what your journey, what would be beneficial for your journey, we have an emergency house, a residential emergency house that will help women who are looking to detox and stabilize and then make their next informed decision from that place. We also have long-term healing that allows women to go like 9 to 12 months, just kind of unpacking like who they want to become. For me, it was important to have 4 seasons where I had no compounding trauma. I just needed 1 year where no one was hurting me and I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
perpetuating the cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
that long-term program is really wonderful. And then obviously the transitional apartments and transitional living for anyone who's like, I have this healing, but I just need some community, some like-minded community who will help me to launch in the way that I want to launch. So you can find all of those at refugeforwomen.org. I'm specifically at refugeforwomen.org/Kentucky. Refuge
Mm-hmm.
for Women Kentucky on socials. You can find me on there. And then my books are on Amazon, Purchased Leaving the Sex Trade and Integrated Living Beyond the Sex Trade. And I'm just happy to connect with anyone who is just looking for some encouragement on whatever their next step forward is.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Well, I will definitely put those links in the podcast show notes as well, so they can pick up your book or connect with you via Refuge for Women. And yeah, I love it. Love it. Just I always love to say, just keep climbing, right? Keep making a difference in what you're doing. And thanks for sharing.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, podcast listeners, talk to you next time.
Start increasing your influence and maximizing your potential with Ria's audiobooks, available at audible.com, amazon.com, and iBooks. Please visit riastory.com to learn about Ria's books, resources, speaking, and training programs. Thanks for listening.